There's messages in every game. Like Pac-Man. Do you know what PAC stands for? PAC. Program and Control. He's Program and Control Man. The whole thing's a metaphor. He thinks he's got free will, but really, he's trapped in a maze, in a system. All he can do is consume. He's pursued by demons that are probably just in his own head. And even if he does manage to escape by slipping out one side of the maze, what happens? He comes right back in the other side. People think it's a happy game. It's not a happy game. It's a nightmare world. And the worst thing is, it's real and we live in it.
It's almost hard to know where to begin when talking about Pac-Man. It's a game that created an entire genre. It was copied and iterated upon by competitors, and of course it was expanded on in various ways. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to think of an arcade property from that era that's still so instantaneously recognizable in 2019. Not just Pac-Man itself, but even this specific version of the game has sort of gotten around lately. I mean, it's been on Virtual Console and, of course, the NES Classic. It's been included with these standalone tabletop players that you've probably seen, and in plug-and-plays, sometimes by surprise. So I know that this isn't everyone's favorite version of the game, certainly, but in the time it came out, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any home versions that did the game quite as much justice as this one did. You could certainly do worse, even by 1984. And it was certainly one of those landmark titles that Namco put out when they decided to hop on board the Famicom train, thus the 03 on the label there. And it's certainly a very stylish cartridge, I think, that Namco is using that style of the cartoon art over a screenshot. Yeah, even the end label looks really cool. So yeah, I guess the only thing left to do really actually is to plug this in and play it. So let's do that now. Okay, here we are, Pac-Man for the Famicom. As you can tell by the ghost names, definitely not the North American names. I think Pinky is the only one that sort of has stayed the same. We all know to be afraid of Okie Dokie. All right, let's actually get going here. So you can tell right away that, one of the reasons why this version isn't looked highly upon nowadays, because it doesn't sound quite right, it doesn't look quite right. The way you can tell for the Pac-Man sprite, the way he fills out the maze isn't quite right. The dimensions and the, the sounds are not quite right. But it also has to be said, for the time, this has to be a pretty good version, I would think. I mean, especially in Japan. I mean, the only other versions of Pac-Man that would have been out would have been for whatever was on personal computers, which certainly would not have been something in everyone's household. So this was probably the most popular and available way for a lot of people at the time to have played Pac-Man at home. And like I was saying, this version certainly gotten around, and there's various plug-and-plays. I think we all remember the AT Games Arcade Blast debacle from last month or so, right? But I think primarily the real problem with this game, generally speaking, is just the fact that the controls are not quite as snappy as they should be. It feels like there's some kind of weird lag, or it's not quite as responsive as you would want it to be, really. I mean, it's not terrible, but you can feel it when you're actually playing it. You can feel it. So this is not necessarily, in 2019, this is not necessarily the version you would want to play. But it's also not terrible, and I think for the time it was probably quite reasonable, really. This version probably gets more hate than it deserves, but it certainly has gotten around. And you certainly can't deny the ongoing popularity of the brand, the platform, the game itself just continues to endure. It helped create an entire genre. I'm doing okay now. I was practicing earlier, I had a good run, then I had a bad run, so I'm doing okay this time, it looks like. Although I also don't want to be playing this game forever, because I think we all know Pac-Man. We know how to play Pac-Man. This is almost a formality at this point, but I did buy this cartridge. I actually got it mostly just to play with the wife, because it's a very, you just pop it in the cart system and play. It's like you don't have to set up the emulator on the RetroPie, whatever, Well, that's not difficult to set up either. And obviously there's versions of the arcade game that are on the Namco collection for the Switch that I got, and it's on the PS4. There are so many ways to play the arcade version of Pac-Man that this probably isn't necessarily the recommended way to do it. Although the cartridge itself looks really cool. Like, I think the artwork on that is really cool. There we go. So that takes us to the first intermission, right? And all the intermissions are in this game. They're here. So we'll play one more board, a succeed or failure, and we'll call it quits after that, because I don't want to be playing this forever necessarily. We all got things to do. We all have more exciting videos to watch. So we'll just see how we do here, and then we'll call it quits. And most of the ghost behaviors are pretty much spot on, Oh, the other ghost is down there. I thought they were all together. You can really tell that the dot eating sound is not the same as the arcade version. This sort of reminds me of the remember those plug-and plays they try to do with the Atari and Intellivision stuff maybe 10 years or so ago. Like the original Atari Flashback was an NES on a chip, and one of the ways it was immediately obvious that it was not. One of the ways it was immediately obvious that it was an NES on a chip was just the sounds. Like the NES does not do a good job of replicating the Atari console sounds or the original arcade sounds. It has its own kind of sound profile that is immediately recognizable. And it's not quite the same as the original arcade hardware stuff. Okay, so I did the board. Yeah, I'm actually playing pretty well, but I don't want to be playing this thing forever, so I'm going to call it quits right here and pause the game, because I'm probably going to finish this game out because I'm doing it okay. But yeah, thanks for watching. I hope I didn't bore you too much with my endless Pac-Man play on the Famicom. All right, I keep wanting to play it. I can't help it. Okay, there we go. Now is a good time to die. Okay, let's pass out of this. So yeah, that was Pac-Man. So there are obviously a lot of different ways to play Pac-Man in 2019, including the arcade version. But this is a fairly inexpensive cart to acquire, and it's still plenty of fun despite its flaws. So anyway, thanks for watching, and keep listening for those numbers.